5 reasons you should not use a 22 long rifle pistol for self-defense. So around a 22 long rifle, and I got a 22 long rifle pistol right here. Taurus TX22. It's got about a 4-inch barrel. Pretty nice pistol overall. But you guys have to understand, I don't sit around thinking of things to talk about. Rather, because I have a YouTube channel, I often get a lot of comments on that channel daily. And throughout those comments on an average day, there's always somebody at least once a day, well, I use 22 long rifle because, and they list all these different reasons why they use it and why it's a better option for self-defense versus other calibers. And the way I'm looking at it, you know, I'm a ballistic tester. I do a lot of different ballistic testing with centerfire handguns. I've tested a lot of 22 long rifle too. So looking at that, seeing what I'm seeing in my terminal ballistics testing and all of that, 22 long rifle isn't that great. So I'm going to give you some reasons here why it's not a good choice for self-defense. A lot of the comments I get is like, well, it's all about shot placement. Make place those shots right. You know, it doesn't matter what your larger hollow points will do. It doesn't matter what your 9mm hollow point will do. It doesn't matter what your 357 Magnum hollow point would do. It's all about shot placement. I get stuff like that all the time. Also, dead is dead. Why do you need more than a 22? Dead is dead. You know, you're dead with a 22 and you're dead with something else. So dead is dead. And I get that all the time. Kind of silly way to word stuff, but I get that all the time. So let's start with the reasons why 22 is not the best for self-defense, and I'm also going to do a ballistic test to kind of illustrate this. Number one is reliability. 22 long rifle is notoriously unreliable, not just in that you get dead primers a lot of the times because it is a rim fire. A lot of times those don't go off, but also the power level is pretty low. You're generally at a sub 100 foot-pounds energy out of a pistol. It's just not a lot of power to reliably cycle a pistol all the time. So whether you're talking in a semi-auto pistol or a revolver, you're gonna come across some reliability issues. You're gonna have a lot more times where you press the trigger and nothing happens versus a center fire, and that's just all there is to it. And when you're talking precious moments where you're trying to stop a threat, the loudest sound you can hear is a click, and it might take almost nothing to clear that, or it might take a lot to clear that, but it's definitely not something that you want to have when you're trying to defend yourself. Number two is the raw data on those cartridges. You know, there's a lot of different data out there, whether you're talking the Snow and Marshall data, whether you're talking the Greg Elfridge data, and there's all other types of information out there, and they all kind of come about the same conclusion. Now, I know whenever I say this that, you know, it's not good numbers. People will be like, well, there's a lot of people that are in the morgue because of 22s, and that's something different. Receiving a fatal wound isn't necessarily the same thing as stopping a threat at the moment. There's a big difference there. But raw data, Snow and Marshall shows that 22s anywhere between 21 to 34% one-shot stop. If you compare that to 9mm, 81 to 91%. If you look at the Greg Elfridge data, it's flipped upside down where there's a lot of failures to stop. What's the percent that they didn't stop when you're firing at an attacker? With the 22 long rifle, it's significantly higher numbers than with centerfire cartridges. So the raw data out there shows that the 22 long rifle isn't necessarily effective at stopping threats. This is a lot of collected data, and I think people should look at it rather than just make their own assumptions on it. Number three, the shot placement argument is wrong. And let me explain here a little bit. People say it's all about shot placement. Well, it's not all about shot placement. That's why we have had such extensive testing of terminal ballistics since the 1986 Miami shootout where agents were killed because one of those agents shot these bad guys and the bullet stopped short of the heart and it did not incapacitate him because it was a silver tip 9mm and that bullet did not perform very well. It's kind of a soft bullet. It deformed too much. It didn't penetrate enough. So even though this agent made perfect shot placement, did he really make shot placement? Well, he made shot placement on the outside of the body, but it didn't hit where he wanted to go in the inside of the body. 22 long rifle is just like that, but worse. 22 long rifle, it has very soft bullets. It's pretty much never jacketed. It is just a soft lead bullet. It is sometimes copper washed, and when they hit something, they tend to want to deform a lot more than other cartridges for two reasons. One, there's no jacket, and two, there's not much bullet mass there, so it just wants to kind of flatten. As where bigger cartridges can handle going through bones easier, going through hard barriers easier. So it takes very little to flatten a 22 long rifle bullet, so you might not actually make shot placement. There's been stories of people being shot right here, hits a sternum, flattens against the sternum, goes out the body like from the side of the buttocks from a perfect shot placement with a 22, because it's very unpredictable with those soft bullets what they're going to do. So shot placement is not always shot placement, and it's not all about shot placement. It's about terminal ballistics and picking something that's capable, that's going to mirror your outside of the body shot placement with the inside of the body shot placement. Now, it's important to hit your target, but it's not all about shot placement. Another point to that is, if 22 long rifle was so good, and if most police departments are about saving money, why are police departments not carrying 22? Why is the FBI not carrying 22? Why is 22 pistols not issued to the military? Number 4 is a continuation of number 3, where hard barrier penetration. That's a big problem with 22 long rifle. For all the things I mentioned with, hitting bones and flattening, they very easily flatten against hard barriers, and there's not a lot of bullet mass there. So anytime a wall it gets in the way, or a car door, or a piece of glass, or whatever else, it can very easily deflect that bullet or cause that bullet to deform to a level where it's not going to adequately penetrate at that point. Therefore, you can't make proper shot placement. And number 5 is also a continuation of pretty much all these reasons, is that even with high capacity, you actually have a low capacity to stop a threat. And what I mean by that is, statistically, it takes a lot of shots to put down a threat with 22 long rifle. Now, psychological stops, yeah, you can do that, but if somebody's like hopped up on drugs or adrenaline or anything like that, it's not unheard of that 5, 10, 15 shots can be placed and it didn't stop that threat, as where a couple rounds of 9mm might have stopped that threat. And that's because you're not penetrating all the time through what you want to penetrate through the bones and all of that like that. So you're looking to get blood pressure drops. You're looking to get weight-bearing bones hit. You hit somebody in the hip with something that's capable, it can bring them down and stop that threat, especially if they're coming at me with a knife. Well, a 22 long rifle might not be able to do that. You're looking to get blood pressure drops. If you got only a 22 caliber bullet, even if you make good shot placement, the size of that bullet is very small compared to larger calibers that are going to make a much larger hole, that are going to lower the blood pressure much more effectively and quicker. So for all these reasons, the 22 long rifle, it really is just one reason, is that its performance is below the threshold of getting proper performance. Now, I know what people are going to say. Well, I only take headshots. I only take headshots. In the heat of a moment, adrenaline going, pulling out a firearm, trying to use that in self-defense with tunnel vision and all of that, and adrenaline going. And the people are saying that within all of that, because they have a 22, they can focus on an area this big and make perfect shot placement, and it's all about shot placement. Now, if you had some reliable 22 ammo and you actually were that cool about it, yes, but I tend to believe that most people would not be that cool about it. So I'm going to do a ballistic test, and I'm also going to do a target test and see if all this stuff is true, just to kind of see how 22 long rifle, an average 22 long rifle, compares to an average 9mm load that I would carry for defense. So I got 4-inch pistols here, one in 22 long rifle, one in 9mm, my Ruger Security 9, and my Taurus TX22. Now with 22 ammo, I've tested a lot of ammo, and it pretty much all does the same thing, so it really doesn't even matter what ammo you use. I just got some basic 22 long rifle auto match. This is just a solid bullet. This is what I would actually recommend if you were hard pressed on actually picking 22, because you don't really want a bullet that's going to expand, because it's going to severely under penetrate. At least something that's solid will actually penetrate enough. And compared to that, I'm going to use what I would use for 9mm, Federal HST. 124 grain plus P, jacketed hollow point. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to do here with our ballistic test now. All right, so with our ballistic test, I am going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy we get at the same time. That'll tell us what kind of energy numbers we're working with. And I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic gel test, but I'm going to do what I call my real world simulation test 4 layers of sweatshirt material followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics to represent hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4 inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. That's kind of my simulation of a thoracic cavity, and clear ballistics in this format is about half as dense as real flesh. So when I'm talking 3 inches, it's really more like 1.5 inch pectoral muscle. So everything is about half. So if we got like 16 inches in this testing, it's more like 8 inches in a real living target. And in addition to that, I want to set up a piece of hard barrier here. So all I got here is I got a very thin 22 gauge piece of steel. I wrapped it in some sheet just because I left it out in the woods and it's kind of rusty and dirty, so I don't want that all in my gel block. But yeah, just a thin 22 gauge steel, and we'll set that up in front also, and we'll see if there's a big difference in the hard barrier penetration of 22 versus 9mm. And then I'm going to do a target test here. So with this, you know, what a lot of people are saying is that, well, with center fire, you know, you might have to aim center mass, but with 22, well, you can just do headshots with 22. So what I want to do is I want to shoot from about here, is about 14 yards. And I'm just going to try to go for some headshots, because being a little bit further than 7 yards kind of simulates adrenaline a little bit better. Just make it a little more difficult for me. So I'll fire at the target, center mass with the 9mm, and then I'm just going to do headshots with the 22 and see if there's a big difference there, and see if I can pull this off the way people are saying. So let's get started with the rest of this test. All right, so both the 22 and the 9mm are rated at 1,200 feet per second. The difference is that, you know, this is going to be rated through a rifle, the 22, but the 9mm plus P is going to be rated through a 4-inch handgun like I'm using. But that's not all about the power, though. It's about shot placement. So 22 long rifle. Let's see what kind of velocity I get out of this pistol here. .893. 917, 882, 905, 899. So pretty consistent velocity there. Our 9mm plus P, again rated at 1,200 feet per second. 124 grain jack and a hollow point. Let's see how this does. 1147, 1159. 1153, 1131, 1150. So quite a bit below that rated velocity, but you know, when we're talking energy numbers, yeah, it's not even going to be close to each other. The 9mm is significantly more powerful. So let's hit our ballistics gel block and see how these compare. All right, our ballistic gel test, our real world simulation, 4 layers of sweatshirt material followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics to represent hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard at the back to represent hitting back ribs. Let's see how our 22 long rifle does. .903 feet per second, so our velocity is staying consistent. 9mm plus P, let's see how this does. 1155 feet per second. Let's go take a look at that. Alright, so looking at the damage here, quite a bit different between these two. And a lot of people say, well, that's not fair, you didn't use a hollow point with the 22. But the reason why I didn't use a hollow point is if they do expand a little bit, you get severe under penetration. So looking at this first 3-inch piece here where the bullet's impacted, big difference there. And that's not based just on one being a hollow point and the other one not, because out of a pistol, the 22 is just not going to expand anyways. So it would look about the same anyways. I've done enough testing to know that. And we look at the hole going through our rib simulation here. There's a little 22. And here's our 9mm. And what we could see here is you could probably fit at least 10 of those holes inside that. So you're like 10 times the amount of area that's cutting. That's a big deal. And we look at what we got going on here with our 22. We did get a little bit of tumbling, and we went to about 10 3/4. So it didn't hit our 12-inch minimum. And the reason why there's a 12-inch minimum, I'll mention this again, the 1986 Miami FBI shootout. So they determined later on that getting about 12 inches in gel would simulate getting enough penetration through a side shot through the arm. So if you can get 12 inches in gel, well, that will be adequate. So what this is saying is that in all circumstances, that's not adequate. You might not hit something vital from a side shot. Now with our 9mm, good amount of energy dump, and we start in this block, a huge amount of tearing and cutting, just everything good. And that bullet is a much larger at the end of that there, and we're at 15.5 inches. So we have like 10 times the area of cutting, and it actually hit something vital, or it could hit something vital because we had good penetration. And a lot of that comes from momentum. Momentum is when you have something heavier, it's going to keep moving in that line that it started with. So it's going to keep cutting through the target, as where with the 22, you lose your momentum very quickly, and you might have some issues with that. So let's put on this piece of hard barrier steel there and see how they compare now. All right, now the same test, but we have that piece of thin steel there, and we have some sheet on the front and back. I didn't even put the fabric back up, the sweatshirt back up, because I don't think it matters at this point, because anything that would clog a hollow point and cause issues will happen within that steel and within that sheet fabric there. So let's see if we get here with our 22 long rifle through the steel here. .930 feet per second. So we had good energy, but there's a reliability issue there. Like I'm talking about, I see this with 22 more than any other caliber. All right. Now let's hit it with our 9mm plus P defensive load here. .52 feet per second. All our shots were consistent with velocity. Let's go take a look. Let me do one more shot there. That went through everything. Let's go take a look. All right, so I took 2 shots with a 9mm specifically to make sure that we had kind of the same thing going on, and we did. And this is actually not a fail. These bullets are designed to do that. Those 9mm bullets are designed that way. It's a Federal HST, and what they're designed to do is have a very hard jacket that's banded to that core. And when they encounter something hard, rather than flatten right away like a typical junky, cheap hollow point, that band will hold that jacket on so that it can continue to push through a hard barrier like a windshield or a piece of steel or anything like that, and still get adequate penetration. But when you do that, you don't get expansion, and the power does show because it will penetrate significantly deep. So one of these, we got a complete pass to 35 inches there, and then the other one went to about 35 inches. So we had a lot more power there. And that's a big difference between the 22 here, which, like I mentioned this before, they will flatten even if they're not a hollow point, because they are such soft lead. They don't have a jacket, and this illustrates this perfectly, the difference between a jacketed bullet and our 22, which parallax will make this look like it's deeper than what it actually is from this camera view, because this lens stretches it. But from a straight on view, our track goes to 5.5 inches. That might not even hit something vital from a front on shot. So really what it comes down to is something like a 9mm or a 40 or a 45 or anything else you can think of is going to be adequate. through multiple angles through the body, through multiple hard barriers in the way, anything like that, whether it be a drywall or windshield or whatever. And if you're out on the street and you're driving along and you might need to defend yourself, you know, you're going to be well armed with a reliable 9mm pistol that has good ammo in it. As we're with this, what are we going to get with a 22? Shallow penetration, even without a hard barrier, a malfunction, severe underpenetration. If there is a barrier, it's just not good. And this illustrates my point here. So let's pull these out of the block, these bullets out of the block. We'll take a close-up look at these bullets, and then I'll do our shooting at steel drill to show what I mean there. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through our standard test with our rib simulation and our fabric. Here's our 9mm plus P, and here's our 22 long rifle. And I have to say this, you know, I'm not trying to rig these up with like the best 9mm ammo versus the worst 22 ammo. I'm actually looking at pretty much what I would consider the best of both, because your typical 40 grain solid has the mass to penetrate adequately, more adequately than a lot of rounds that are lighter. So I would pick this because you can practice with it a lot and still have an okay round. So I personally, I would go and find a 40 grain solid that is very reliable. It doesn't have to be that brand. And that would be what I would be training with all the time and making sure I picked the most reliable brand that I could have in that. That's why I chose that. And with this is the 9mm I would recommend to most people. It's one of the best performing 9mm out there. But if we take a close-up look here, we can see, you know, there's a lot to be said about the difference in the diameter there. You know, this is the size of hole damage you're going to have versus this much damage. And you're cutting a significantly larger hole, creating significantly more tissue damage and blood loss. And that makes a big, big difference there to the outcome of a situation. This is going to be pretty effective. That's why most police departments and the FBI pick it, is because they found that the 9mm, pretty much it's as low as they can go and still have decent performance. So yeah, center fire way, way better there. Now through our hard barrier test, big difference here. You know, this illustrates again what I was talking about. It doesn't matter whether it was if it's a hollow point or not. It's going to look like this going through something hard, just because the type of lead that is used in 22 is very soft and there's no jacket on it. We compare that to the 9mm through our barrier there. There's a big difference there in the overall everything. You know, we had like 5.5 inches versus 35 inches penetration. That's a lot more penetration. You know, the nose of that 22 might be about the same diameter, but that's where it ends for that. You know, this is a very hard jacket, and it performed exactly as it was intended to, is when it hits something hard rather than, you know, break apart. That harder than typical jacket holds together to, after going through something hard, to make sure there's enough penetration on the other side. It's designed that way for law enforcement. So, you know, we look at our 22 and we look at our 9mm, you know, clearly you should be carrying at least this, in my opinion. Now, I carry bigger calibers. I think 40 is better. You know, the statistics show it as being better, and other stuff like that, but this isn't bad at all. So my main point is, you know, if you're carrying a 22, maybe reconsider it. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, 14 yards from the target, so I choose 14 instead of 7, just to double that difficulty there, to try to maybe a little bit simulate tunnel vision and adrenaline. I mean, it's not going to do it perfectly, but just increasing that difficult will make a difference here. So I'm just going to draw from the holster here and try to land some shots on target. Now with the 9mm, I'm doing center mass, because, you know, when that tunnel vision happens, it's going to be hard to really focus on a center point. So I'm going to do my best here with our 9mm. So there's our 9mm. All right. Let me do that same thing. I'll try to make some headshots and see if I can do that. So what I was doing there is just popping them off as fast as I think I can hit it without getting that good of sight picture. Just trying to simulate our adrenaline a little bit. And doing that, we can see that even with a 9mm, it's easy to shoot. You know, it's not easy necessarily to place shots. So with our 22, I'm going to do the same thing, but we're going to start with just doing headshots. So I'm going to try to do the same thing here. Oh. Next round didn't feed. Back on the reliability issues there. I'll keep going. Alright, so there's a little validity to that. I do think, though, in the heat of the moment, when adrenaline's pumping, you're probably going to miss more than that. But doing that, it wasn't that hard to do. But it also wasn't that hard to do, you know, center mass with the 9mm. It takes more time. I'm a little overconfident with this, so I missed a whole bunch of times, but I'm like bringing it back down on target. And yeah, it's doable here. So looking at this, I can kind of see where people are coming from. But you also have to factor in that how many times did this malfunction versus how many times do center fire pistols malfunction. So it's like every time you press the trigger with this, you can have a little more confidence that it's going to go bang. You have a little more confidence that if you hit anything, really, it's going to cause a lot of damage and bring down that threat. As where with the 22, there's a good chance you're going to make hit after hit after hit, and the threat's not going to go down. Now you could say, well, I'm going to take headshots. You know, that's the only place where it's probably going to be viable to truly bring down a threat. But even then, you never know, because skull shots can, you know, flatten the bullets again and be glancing shots. They have to really be down in the T-zone. So it actually is a smaller spot to hit than what you would think to drop a threat like that. And it's just, in my opinion, it's just not a good idea to like plan around all of that to choose something that's not going to work for anything but for hitting the smallest possible target when your adrenaline is pumping. That's not to say that 22 isn't necessarily going to work. You know, the sight of a gun, psychological stop. One bullet fired that you might even miss, psychological stop. You might hit center mass, it might not go very deep. Still, I give up, psychological stop. Yes, they're good for that, but you got somebody that's on drugs and adrenaline and all of that, and they're not going to stop, and you need to bring down the person with a weight-bearing bone shot or blood pressure shot. You know, you got to remember, like, you could fit 10 of those 22s in that 9mm hole. So judging from that, the amount of damage I think you could do with one 9mm is roughly the same as what you could do with 10 22s. So you have a lot more firepower with like 15 rounds of 9mm versus whatever your 22 pistol could hold. So I would recommend going with something center fire. Even a full metal jacket 380 or 32 ACP is going to be significantly more effective through ribs than anything you can get in 22. So interesting test. That's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like. Thanks for watching.